Former Ivory Coast President Laurent Gbagbo is looking to make a return to the country's helm. The 78-year-old has agreed to run for presidency again, despite being disqualified by a 20-year jail sentence. The African People's Party leader was the first former head of state to go on trial at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. He was acquitted of all charges in 2019. Ivorians head to the polls in October 2025. Political analyst Mbulle-Nziege Leonard joins me via video link to unpack Ivorian politics. Mbulle Leonard, appreciate your time. Now, how significant is Laurent Gbagbo's decision to run for president again, considering his previous trial at the International Criminal Court and his subsequent acquittal, and the fact that he's 78 years old and will be 80 years old when the elections come?
Good evening, Hugo, and thank you for having me on air. It came not necessarily as a surprise that Gbagbo announced over the weekend that he would run as the political party that he runs, that is the PPCI's candidate for the 2025 presidential election, because last year in August at a political rally, he had indicated that he still has the desire to pursue another presidential mandate if the party selects him. And he is the founder of the party, and the way in which opposition politics, is operated outside of South Africa, and particularly in West Africa, is that the founder of the party usually has an oversized influence with respect to party matters. So it wasn't a surprise. And, the interesting thing about Cote d'Ivoire, as well as many other West African countries, that the opposition leaders consider that being of age and gives you enough experience to be able to pursue presidential mandates, as well as, to hold high ranking offices. President Ouattara himself is in his 80s, and the other former leader of the opposition, Henri Konan Bedi, the former president who passed away in August, passed away at the age of 91, that is 89. So Cote d'Ivoire has a tradition of, older political leaders at the forefront. So I think former President Gbagbo was just trying to act in that light, because he believes that he still has, another shot at potentially regaining the presidential seat.
So remind us how he lost the presidency initially, because the pictures that are vivid in my mind is him literally being jostled by soldiers from one place to the next, and I think Mrs. Gbagbo suffered the same fate. So it was a case of harassment that you don't particularly want to see with any statesman or anybody for that matter.
Yes, Laurent Gbagbo is a well-revered individual, not only within the Ivorian political landscape, but then across the continent. He's a well-known Pan-Africanist. He's a historian. He had been a long-standing opposition leader of the opposition, and in 2000, he surprisingly emerged as president. However, his presidency suffered a lot of, he wasn't able to fulfill the ambitions of his mandate, because in 2002, a civil war broke out after a failed coup. And the civil war, which lasted from 2002 to 2007, effectively, prevented him from pursuing his presidential agenda. And in 2010, when they had the presidential elections, which have been cancelled repeatedly since 2005, he refused to accept the loss to his longtime rival, Alassane Ouattara, which led to, an ensuing civil war, which led to over 3,000 deaths. And as a result, he was removed from power by an international force alongside rebels who were loyal to Alassane Ouattara. So, that's always been a stain on Gbagbo's legacy, because he believes that he was never able to fulfill his presidential mandate. He is a socialist, and he wanted, Cote d'Ivoire, a country which has been very much market-oriented, to be able to have more equitable wealth distribution. He wanted to establish a more Pan-African agenda. He wanted diplomacy to pursue a global South nations, but then, because of the civil war, that wasn't possible. And, him being away for so long because he was arrested and at the Hague has also given him some sort of redemptive logic, where he believes that he still has more to give to the country.
So let's talk about the people of Cote d'Ivoire and how they're likely to react to his re-emergence or re-engagement in the political circles. Many a time when an individual such as Laurent Gbagbo is persecuted and then acquitted, it almost gives him a street credibility, if you will, of sorts of, I've sacrificed, I've fought, and I've conquered, and I'm ready to lead. Is he welcomed by the people of Cote d'Ivoire?
Well, Laurent Gbagbo is probably the Ivorian politician, especially amongst the old guard, who has the, greatest quote-unquote street credibility. He was the only one who was not a member of the former ruling party, that was the PDCE, which was the single party under the rule of the founding president, Félix Houphouët-Boigny. He had been in prison many times. He had even been in exile. And, him coming to power, it was because of the people in the streets. The common man really related to him, even though he is an intellectual. And despite his departure from Cote d'Ivoire because of his arrest and departure to the Hague, he remained very, very popular. A lot of people were unhappy. He was very, very, well beloved, especially not only in Cote d'Ivoire, but across West Africa. But then him returning, despite the fact that he was, well received and he was able to reestablish himself in the political sphere, things are different because, the ruling party, the RHDP, has been able to consolidate itself as a dominant party. Initially, they were a party which had its base in northern Cote d'Ivoire, where President Ouattara is from. But then gradually, they've also been able to extend into, even Gbagbo's former strongholds in western Cote d'Ivoire, where he comes from, as well as many of the working class neighborhoods in Abidjan, which has historically been aligned with President Gbagbo. So even though he is still highly appreciated, the unfortunate thing for him is that, it seems like the Ivorian electorate, because of, changing demographics and also because of the performance and the ability of the ruling party to implant themselves, he doesn't have the same level of electoral popularity. And this was manifested in September, when there were local elections. And there are over 200 municipal councils in Ivory Coast, but then his party was only able to secure 2 of them. So it just shows that despite the fact that he is appreciated as a former head of state, as a Pan-Africanist, as an intellectual, as somebody who had been at the forefront of Cote d'Ivoire's political activity, that doesn't necessarily mean that in this day and age they're ready for him to return to run the country as head of state.
Well, Ivory Coast has had some political instability and violence, certainly in its history. What are some of the factors that need to be put in place to ensure a free and fair election come 2025?
Yes, Cote d'Ivoire, which for the better part of close to 40 years, 1960 to 1999, was considered the most politically stable country in Francophone West Africa. And Africa in general. It didn't suffer a coup d'etat until 1999. And that set off, like you said, a few decades of political crisis, which was, marred by violence. There was the civil war from 2002 to 2007. There was a post-electoral crisis in 2010 and 2011. And even in 2020, when President Ouattara decided to go pursue a third presidential term, even though the Constitution stipulated he could only undertake 2, it led to violence which caused the deaths of over 80 people. But ever since then, President Ouattara has embarked on, a crusade of political dialogue and reconciliation with the opposition. And this has culminated in the return of political exiles like Gbagbo himself, Charles Goudet, and many other individuals who during those 20 years of crisis have been arrested and been forced to exile. So that in itself, allowing those individuals to return to the country, is one way to ensure a sane and peaceful political climate, because that has always been a source of contention. Other mechanisms are the reform of the Electoral Commission, the CEI, the Commission Indépendante, the Commission Electorale Indépendante. What has been a recurring complaint from a lot of the opposition leaders is that it is unfair. There is an oversized representation of the ruling party as well as members of government. They also believe that the electoral register doesn't take into account the population demographics, because Cote d'Ivoire has over 30 million people, but there are only 7 million registered voters, and their voter registration is skewed because there are more people registered in areas which are ruling party strongholds compared to areas perceived as, supporting the opposition. So I think those are some of the issues that need to be resolved to ensure that the elections in 2025 are free and fair and also very peaceful. And then above all, President Ouattara not deciding to go for a 4th presidential term, because there have been rumors that he wants to go in for another presidential mandate. And as we've seen in other African countries, trying to go for another term usually brings trouble.
And finally, we've got about a minute to wrap up Mbulle-Nziege. Let's talk about what the various politicians are taking to the masses, to the people in Cote d'Ivoire. You know, what pitch or what manifesto is likely to resonate with the people of Cote d'Ivoire?
Well, with the ruling party, whether it's President Ouattara or anybody else in that coalition, it's going to be continuity. Cote d'Ivoire has experienced 7% growth since 2012 under his reign. There's been a lot of infrastructure development. We just saw with the African Nations Cup, it was a showcase of how Ivory Coast has recovered from the war in 2011. So, you know, they're going to bank on that. Former President Gbagbo is going to talk about, you know, he's going to use his credentials as a leading opposition leader. He's going to talk about a socialist agenda, trying to redistribute wealth. And then you have Tidjane Thiam, the former banker, who's now the leader of the PDCI opposition party. He is also going to talk about the fact that he's a new generation Ivorian politician who can bring, you know, new ideas, particularly considering that he was very prominent in global private sector circles. So everybody's trying to bring something different to the table, but then we'll only see in 2025 whether it actually comes to fruition.
So let's talk about gender politics here. Do we have any women in Ivorian Cote d'Ivoire politics that are likely to make an impact on the political situation? So maybe not running as presidential candidates, but either as co-runners or of some significant sort.
So in the gender perspective, as is the case, particularly in West Africa and especially in Francophone countries, there is a severe underrepresentation of women in political circles. And that's not just in cabinet, that trickles down to the grassroots level. And Cote d'Ivoire is interesting because Laurent Gbagbo's former wife, the former First Lady, Simone Gbagbo, she is one of the frontline politicians. She created his former party, the FPI, in the 1980s, and you know, during the years of conflict, she was at the front line mobilizing a lot of young people, and she's quite popular. The other day, she had a meeting with the head of the opposition, Tidjane Thiam, and there was rumors that she would, potentially establish a political alliance with him. And even though she no longer has the same influence as she did during the presidency of Laurent Gbagbo, she's still a very, very important figure. She has a base. She's very popular amongst young people and amongst the evangelical constituency in Cote d'Ivoire, which is also very, very important. You also have within the ruling party, you have Madame Kandia Camara. She is the president of the Senate. So she has that's, I think, the third person in the state protocol. So even though she's not running for president, she's someone who has been with Laurent. She's been with President Ouattara from when he started his party, the RHDP, in 1994. So she is someone who, even though she's not going to it's unlikely that she's going to be forward as a candidate, she will have a say with respect to, you know, mobilizing people, influencing who could potentially succeed him. But then in general, even though the Ivorian population, I think it's 51% female, women don't have an oversized influence in the political dispensation in that country.
Mbulle-Nziege, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for speaking to us on Africa Today. Political analyst Mbulle-Nziege Leonard unpacking for us the Ivorian Coast politics.